I thought it might be kind of interesting to take a look at an aspect of 3ds Max. It's been around for a long time, but not a lot of people use, or new or intermediate users may be new to this type of thing. And it's a modifier called the attribute holder. Now, if you've done parameter wiring, you're probably familiar with this already, but if not, an attribute holder is a special modifier that can go on any object right here. So if you just find it in the drop-down list, it's just called attribute holder. And the first time you put an attribute holder on an object, it's actually empty because you have to add the attributes to it. So showing you kind of a finished example of how this can be used, I have our little rascal character here, and I want to control his eye blinking. And so what I've done is I've set up a slider that allows me to control how his eyes open and close, and we can animate this feature. So I want to add another level of control to this that allows us to actually change his material as well over time. And since he's kind of this little alien dude, that may be an attribute of his personality, or his when he gets angry he turns to a different color, that sort of thing, and I want to be able to control that without having to do a lot of animated material. So we're going to go ahead and set that up using an attribute holder, and we're going to add a separate piece of geometry off to the side that allows us to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our scene. We have some setup to do to actually make this occur, so we're going to do that. First thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to turn off my outliner. If you know me and have seen my posts before, you know that I use the outliner tool quite a bit. We're going to go ahead and create a shape here. We're just going to use a rectangle, and we're just going to make it a color similar to what we have, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to align it to this object. Alright, but just to make sure it's on the same plane, and then I'm just going to offset it and link it so that since it's a controller to the head, wherever the head goes, so goes our controller. And this is just going to be used to hold the attribute holder modifier. So before we can actually start setting up and adding the attribute holder modifier, we actually have to prepare the material so that it can be hooked up. So let's go ahead and see how we're going to do that. So I have our slate material editor here, and I have the basic material of our character, of our little rascal character. It's just a straight up Arch Design material. And you can see here that we have 3 different colored bitmaps. The one that's currently assigned, and then we have kind of an orange color, and we also have a green color. So these 3 different maps in total. And we're going to go ahead and put them in the same material, and then use the attribute holder to animate between them. So to do it is pretty simple. I'm going to unhook the diffuse color of the main one right now, and I'm going to add in a simple composite map. And this is just like a compositing layering system you'd find in a paint package or anything like that. So I'll hook this texture back up. Okay, so we have our first layer. And I'm going to go ahead and double click this to get to our layer. So here are all of our layers. We have the ability to control opacity, masks, things like that. We want a total of 3 layers. And notice our material moves to the bottom layer, so we're stacking materials on top. So we'll do green next, and we'll leave layer 3 next. We can use the same normal bump map to be the surface of the character. We don't need 3 separate ones for that, and I'll right click and say hide unused node slots, so we have this. So now we have the ability to control the opacity between the different layers. So let me just kind of close this up a little bit and move this out of the way, and you can see currently our guy has turned orange. That's because the orange layer is on top. If I turn that opacity down to 0, you can see that he turns gray, and if I turn that opacity off, you can see, or green, and if I turn the green layer off, you can see that he goes all the way down to our original layer. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to use the attribute holder to hook up a method to easily animate between the opacity of the layers. So I'm just going to set these all back to 100 to begin with. And I'm just going to set this slate material editor off to the side and center this guy back up, and let's go ahead and take a look and see how to do that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and set up the attribute. So we'll go ahead and select our rectangle and add the attribute holder modifier, and you can see there's nothing in there right now. We need to go into the curve editor to begin to set that up. So open up the curve editor, choose our modified object, there's our attribute holder, you right click and say add or edit a parameter, and now we have something that we can begin to hook up. So we just make sure that we're using the selected object's current modifier, and we're going to determine which type of controller we want to use here. Now, this may look a little confusing, but if you think about it, this is basically all of the different types of controllers in Max boiled down to their types. And since we want to blend between multiple materials, we want to use a float. A good example of this would be a decimal type of number, a partial number, as opposed to an integer, which would be a whole number. So we're going to choose float, and we're going to use a slider. Now currently in the material it's a spinner, because you saw that there was a spinner there for controlling the percentage of opacity. We're just going to use a slider, and we're going to set this up to be the strength of each individual layer. So we'll call this layer 1. Actually, we'll leave that, we'll call this layer 2, because layer 1 will be 100% the whole time. We don't really need a controller for that, because that'll be the base one. So we'll call this layer 2, and that layer was green. And the range is the same range on that. We'll go ahead and add some ticks to it here. And we'll just put a couple of ticks in there just to be able to determine where it is. And we'll go ahead and add that. And as soon as we say add, you can see that layer green has been set up over here. Now it's not hooked up to anything yet. So we're going to go ahead and do one more that matches. This one will be layer 3. And this one was orange. Okay, so same deal, same number of ticks. The percentage is fine, the range is fine there. We'll go ahead and say add parameter. All right, so now we have our two colors here that we want to control. I can go ahead and close this, and I can go ahead and close our controller. And now it's just a matter of hooking them up. Let's go ahead and, now that we have the attributes set up, let's hook up the attributes to the material. Now this is a little quirk in 3ds Max. You know, over here on our scene we have the ability to control the opacity using a spinner, and that generally indicates that that's an animatable track in 3ds Max. Well, if I go into the curve editor for this material, you'll notice that here's the composite material, but there currently is no track visible for the ability to control the opacity. So if we look all through there, we will not find it. So little trick to reveal the track so that it's animatable before we can hook it up is to do the following. It's very simple. We'll just go ahead and turn on auto key, and we'll just advance one frame, and we'll just remove the opacity on each one of the layers to generate a key. And when we do this, I'll bring my material, or I'll bring my curve editor back. You can see now that the animatable tracks within the diffuse color map have now been revealed. And now that they're revealed, we can actually go hook them up. So be sure to turn off auto key. We can delete those keys later. We don't actually need them. We just need to reveal this. So I'll go ahead and hide our slate material editor, and now we can do this. Now some of this may actually run off the screen here, so I'll try to explain it the best I can. Let me move this up, and there we go. All right, so I'm going to right click on this object and choose wire parameters. And so we want to wire the modified object's attributes. We want to do layer 2 green to our object here. We want to do the body, and this shows us all of the materials, and it does go off the screen. So we're going to do the opacity 1. Let's do that. And this brings up the parameter wiring dialog box. Okay, so now we just do a connection there and connect them. And now when I scrub this, you can see that it brings up the opacity for our green map. Okay, and let's go ahead and do it for the next one. So again, I click here, I right click, I choose wire parameters. We want to do the modified object, the attribute holder. the custom attributes. Now remember, this part can only be done after you've added the attribute holder modifier and attached it to the shape. So we'll do the layer 3 orange, come in here, and we'll choose the body, which shows us all of the materials. I'm sorry it's off screen again, but we're just going to choose composite color map and then opacity number 2. Alright, so as you can see there, opacity number 2, layer 3 orange. We'll go ahead and connect them and hook them up. Okay, so now that we close that, so now I have control over my green color or my orange color and anything in between. So very simple and easy to do. We can change his material. All we have to do is turn on the animate key, and these are animatable. So just to verify that, we'll go ahead and turn on the auto key here. We'll just crank up to around 20, and we'll crank him up to green. And you can see that over time he changes color. Now you'll also notice the spots are in a different spot. We can actually control that too using our material editor. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we would do that. Now I want to keep our layers intact here. So I'm just going to, in maps, I'm going to add a standard color correction map. Alright, and then I'm actually going to add 2 of these. So I'll have another standard color correction map here, and I'm going to pipe our original maps into here. And I'm then going to pipe them into layer 2, and we're going to go ahead and replace the maps that are in there. And the reason I'm doing it this way is I want to maintain the layers that are visible there. Okay, so now I have the same map being used 3 times, and then all we have to do is just set the color offset. So I'm going to slide this off to here so that we can see what's going on. I'm going to crank up our layer 2, which would be green, so we'll just do a color correct towards green for this guy. Now this may actually be a little more interesting because he'll be completely green with the same spots. That could be a little more interesting. Okay, so there's the color correction for that. And I'll go ahead and bring up the color correction for orange. And I need to get that color corrector. Okay, so we'll slide it off the screen, and we'll slide this guy to orange a little bit. Bring up the saturation a tad. Okay, so we're changing the whole map, which is fine. We can work on a mask. We could include a mask in there if we wanted to. But now we have the ability to control all of the colors of our map blending with an attribute.